Hi people, it's Archivist here, hope you're doing well. And today we're going to be taking a look at World of WarCraft running on the 16-inch MacBook Pro with M2 Max processor. To give you an idea of what this machine can do, I'm going to be flying throughout the Dragon Isles, fighting some random enemies, and even dropping into a dungeon. But I do have to throw out one important caveat at the beginning here. I did want to show you footage of the game running at 120Hz because that is indeed what this machine can do. However, when I was enabling ProMotion, I was getting some very odd results in terms of my screen recording to the point where it wasn't worth showing because it wasn't in any way representative. I then thought maybe I can do my recording off screen like I've done in the past, but it's just so awkward for me to set myself up to play that way. So I decided instead to, in terms of what you're actually seeing, to lock the screen to 60Hz. So I'm doing that at the OS level, not within the game, so we do get proper frame pacing. And then to compensate so you can still see the straining that we're putting on the machine, I've cranked the settings really high. So we've got the graphics preset at 10, so that's all the way up. We've got the resolution at max and the resolution scale 100%. There's no real sense in making that go higher. The anti-aliasing we do have turned off, but because the resolution is at max, I don't really see the point in turning on anti-aliasing, particularly on a screen this small. So we're really pushing the machine here, and I actually realised as I was recording this that this might be a genuinely good way to play the game if you favour graphical fidelity, because as nice as 120Hz is, for an MMO in particular, you really don't need it to be updating that frequently. I think 60 is perfectly fine, and you do, however, benefit, I think, from seeing the game looking better because, you know, World of WarCraft is about exploring this fantastical world, and the better that world looks, I think the more you get out of it. So I'm wondering if some people will genuinely benefit from taking this approach of locking to 60Hz and really cranking up the settings. Yeah, it's not going to be for everyone, but I'm thinking I might do this more often myself. However, just to describe what the game is like if you're running at ProMotion, I tend to find that I can't get away with cranking the settings all the way up unless I'm happy with the frame rate really bouncing between 60 and 120. For me, that is quite distracting. I'd honestly rather it was more consistent and lower. So in order to get ProMotion and consistency, I put the resolution scale down to 75%. And I set the graphics preset to 6 or 7. 7 will do most of the time, but there are some areas where 6 becomes more appropriate. And the thing is, a lot of the time, I'm not even playing the game on the MacBook Pro screen. Instead, I'm hooking it up to an external display and playing it there. And you know, the thing is, the first time I did that, I looked at it and thought, this might be the first MacBook Pro I've ever gotten where I'm genuinely happy with how the game looks in a setting that I would normally, associate with a desktop. Because normally my desktop, my Windows desktop that is hooked up to my 4K screen. But hooking up the MacBook Pro, genuinely, it didn't look that different. And I cannot say that of any other of the MacBook Pros I've looked at. Normally I'm looking at quite portable MacBooks, the last one, for example, being the M2 MacBook Air. And while I was impressed with it when you take into account the size of the MacBook Air, if you tried to hook that up to an external display and crank the settings up, it wasn't going to impress. After not too long, it would begin to thermal throttle. It was quite blurry because you definitely couldn't get it to 4K without really hitting the frame rate. So, I had to always say, this is a good MacBook if you're using it portably, but don't use this as your main machine for World of WarCraft. This might be the first time I can genuinely say that this MacBook Pro might be worth getting as your primary World of WarCraft computer because it can play it that well. It really is quite impressive. The only thing that stops me saying it's a no-brainer, of course, is that the price for this machine, especially in the UK right now, is ridiculous, and you can definitely find a more capable Windows machine for less money. So much like the approach I take is that, look, I don't buy these MacBooks to play World of WarCraft specifically. I buy them for other purposes, but I always install World of WarCraft because it's nice to have on the go, right, as like a game that I can immerse myself in because it just offers so much content. So it's the one game you need really for your device. So if you're looking at a MacBook Pro, you know you need a MacBook, but you might want a good game on the side, then this can potentially serve you quite well. In the footage, I was keen to try and really emphasize Dragonriding because that really strains the streaming system. You're flying incredibly fast, faster than we've ever flown before, especially when you really hit, that terminal velocity. And you're moving very quickly, the environment's rendering, and if you're flying very close to the ground, that's a huge amount that your MacBook is having to bring into the world in a very short space of time. So it's a great way of understanding what this device can really do. It definitely isn't perfect. It's not locking to 60 FPS at these really high settings, but it's perfectly playable. It doesn't look, in any way ugly, and it looks really nice and sharp. A lot of people will say, and with good reason, that you don't need to get the resolution to max on the laptop display, but I have to say, I think when I'm wearing my glasses in particular, I can definitely appreciate that full native sharpness. It's not full fat 4K on the MacBook Pro screen itself, but it looks really nice, I think. I thought it would be worth us taking a look at a quick dungeon because we're bringing in multiple players fighting multiple enemies, spell effects going off, that sort of thing. And I will say that I was really impressed as we were going through the interior environment fairly quickly because my group was quite enthusiastic to go through as fast as possible, it seems. But when we got out into the more open area with lots of spell effects and fire all over the place, you did start to see the frame rate drop a little bit, which is an indicator of where this machine is not almighty. It does have limits. There are things that can bring the frame rate down even below 60, but it always remained playable. And the fact that we can get this performance when we're at a 10 means that really, considering I think even when the graphics are set to a 7 preset, the game still looks great. You're never going to have any issues with this machine becoming unplayable. So yeah, quick look at the dungeon here, no issues really to speak of, just that little drop there that we should just take mind of. When it comes to fan noise, it really does scale with the demand you're putting on the laptop. So if you've got ProMotion enabled, max settings, yeah, you're going to really hear those fans. They are quite intrusive, and you can try and drown them out of the speakers, but you won't be able to lock them out unless you're wearing some noise cancelling earphones. I mean, if you do have those, yes, you can completely negate it, but without them, you're going to be hearing them. But you can get a good middle ground by locking to 60 Hz like I'm doing here, and also reducing the graphics settings. And the thing is, if you go with that far enough, if you really don't want any kind of fan noise, you can bring the settings down to like 5 and have 60 Hz. And the laptop is legitimately silent, not even just quiet, completely silent. So the fan noise is in some respects your choice, because even if you haven't got direct control over the fans, you can scale the graphics, and the laptop is really good at accurately spinning the fans to what it actually needs. I do love that about MacBooks, is they do seem to be quite good with activating the fans when appropriate. I mean, when I'm using the laptop generally, like I'm recording on it right now, or if I'm watching a YouTube video, I do not hear the fans ever. It's only when I'm doing something demanding. When it comes to heat, this is something that bothers me with every single gaming laptop I've ever used, because it's just unavoidable. And, well, not completely unavoidable, because you can attach an external keyboard, of course, and that's the way that I play on this laptop if I'm going for anything over half an hour. Now, it doesn't get burning hot and uncomfortable, but it definitely gets warm. I mean, I've seen worse than this laptops that it's like my fingers are frying right now. But you can get around it, but don't think, like, even with the fans going at max, you can definitely feel the warmth of the keys when you're playing at graphically demanding settings. One thing I will definitely give Blizzard credit for is that World of WarCraft might just be the best supported native Apple Silicon game that you can get. So few developers make a game for Macs, let alone native for ARM. And the fact that they've continued to update and support it has been absolutely fantastic. But that said, there is a slight disadvantage to being in, I suppose, the minority group when it comes to the overall player base. And that is that if you have a bug with this version of the game, you don't exactly know when it's going to get fixed, because you're just not going to be very high in the priority list. And there is one visual bug that I've noticed since the beginning of Dragonflight, where if you look at the ground, and it is quite obvious, unfortunately, I'm not just nitpicking here, but if you look at the ground in the environment of Dragonflight, you can see where the geometry has been stitched together by the developers. It's represented by these little dotted lines, and I'm pretty confident this is an issue with the ARM version of the game. I went to my iMac, my old Intel iMac, and I booted up the game, and I could not see this at all. And I even went on my Windows machine, could not see any trace of this. But on the ARM version, both on my new MacBook Pro and also my MacBook Air, you could see it clear as day. That said, funnily enough, mentioning clear as day, during the night time within World of Warcraft, it pretty much becomes invisible. It's almost like the more daylight there is in the game, the clearer it becomes, which is quite curious. And furthermore, it's not in every zone. It's in most of the Dragonflight zones to varying degrees. But if you go to like an old zone like a Barrens, I've not seen any evidence of it. So maybe it's just a new technique they've employed that doesn't play well with this ARM version of the game, but I really hope they fix it. And the thing is, I don't know when they're going to, because even if every Apple Silicon user noticed this and complained about it, that's still quite a small section of players. So I don't know when this will get fixed. Will it ever get fixed? I don't know. But yeah, that is one thing to keep in mind, is that you will not be very high on the priority list if there are issues. So we're quickly going to jump back and take a look externally at the MacBook Pro, because of course one thing I can't show you in the screen recording, but is a very important thing to understand, is that pesky notch at the top of the screen. So there are three options that Blizzard provide around this notch. One is overlap, which just allows the notch to exist, and if any UI elements would be beneath it, they are simply obscured, which is not great for obvious reasons. Then there's Shift UI down, which, as it would suggest, brings the UI down entirely so it's beneath the notch, which should be great, but there are certain UI elements, for example when you're choosing body type on character creation, which don't seem to count as UI, and therefore they still end up getting overlapped, so it's not a perfect solution there. And then what should have been the best solution is window below, which will black out the sides, either side of the notch, which in theory would make it a perfect looking display with no odd elements at all. But unfortunately, when you do that, the notch ever so slightly will still overlap the screen, which is just bizarre, because it's clear what they were going for, they just didn't quite get it. And the thing is here, I am convinced I have seen this flash before on the laptop. I just can't recreate it. I've tried turning the setting off and on, going between multiple settings. I can't get it to work, but I'm certain I have seen it flush with the notch. So maybe out there someone's discovered how you guarantee that that's the case, because when I did that before, I thought, yeah, this is the best way to play the game because it just looks like a regular laptop screen. But when I've tried to re-enable it for whatever reason, it's not playing ball here. Maybe it's something to do with resolution or scaling, something like that. It is frustrating to have a solution that's so close to being perfect, but just not quite there. But if you want to get rid of the notch by any means, there is a setting, I think, where you go to the install location of World of Warcraft on Finder, get info, and then you can actually set it to override so that the notch won't be shown. But the disadvantage to this is it is shrinking it diagonally, so you will lose real estate left and right of World of Warcraft as well. So it's almost like there is just no perfect option, unfortunately, for avoiding the notch at the moment, but it should be that window below. So hopefully Blizzard can allow it to be more consistently working, rather than right now when it seems to go from working perfectly to almost working perfectly. So there you go, some general gameplay of World of Warcraft running on the 16-inch MacBook Pro of M2 Max. I will give the full specs either in the description of this video or the pinned comment. Apologies once again for showing only 60Hz lock gameplay in the recording. I just wanted to be as accurate as I could, while also demonstrating the power of the machine by really cranking up those graphics settings. And it genuinely is a great way, I think, to experience the game, getting those really lush visuals with a perfectly playable 60 FPS most of the time. Any questions about this laptop? Doesn't even have to be about World of Warcraft. Any stuff you want, please drop it in the comments and I'll get round to it as soon as I can. As always, people, thanks very much for watching and see you next time.